Good morning. The hour of convening has arrived, and the Senate will now come to order. At this time, I would ask that all unauthorized persons exit our chamber. No worries, Senator. You're authorized, I checked. Chair gets to recognize his distinguished friend from Chickamauga.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a rainy day in Georgia today. And just to let you know, and the senator from the 15th pointed out to me, that it's a Be Humble Day in America. And also, the chairman of Natural Resources, senator from the 7th, told me that today is National Wildlife Day. Could be a part of his behavior, but he told me anyway. Mr. President, the journal's been read and found to be correct.
Thank you, Senator. Do you get sign-offs from the senators when you recognize their districts, or is that just Chair continues to recognize the senator from the 53rd?
Thank you, Mr. President. No, sir, I just take it upon myself to act the way I need to get the point across.
Yes, sir. Well done. Is there objection to dispensing with the reading of the journal? The chair hears none. The reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills and resolutions, please bring them to the Secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, first reading of Senate bills and resolutions, please.
Senate Bill 204 by Senators Tippins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 4 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to vocational, technical, and adult education so as to provide for the State Board of the Technical College System of Georgia to
Higher
award.
Ed.
Senate Bill 205 by Senators Parent of the 42nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 10 of the OCGA relating to commerce and trade so as to prohibit third-party food delivery platforms from charging.
Agriculture and Consumer Affairs.
Senate Bill 206 by Senators Merritt of the 9th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 44 of the OCGA relating to general provisions regarding landlord and tenant so as to provide that a prospective tenant shall not be refused. Senate Bill 207 by Senators James of the 35th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 4 of Title 1 of the OCGA relating to holidays and observances so as to designate a week in this state.
Government oversight.
Senate Bill 208 by Senators Harrell of the 40th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 1 of Title 37 of the OCGA relating to the powers and duties of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities.
Appropriations.
Senate Bill 209 by Senators Jones of the 10th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act to create and establish in DeKalb County, Georgia districts from which the members of the County Board of Education.
State and local government.
Senate Bill 210 by Senators Robertson of the 29th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 40 of the OCGA relating to motor vehicles and traffic so as to provide for definitions relative to registration and licensing of motor vehicles.
Science and technology.
Senate Bill 211 by Senator Summers of the 13th, a bill to be entitled an act to provide that future elections for the office of Judge of the Probate
State
Court
and
of
local government.
Senate Bill 212 by Senators Mullis of the 53rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 50 of the OCGA relating to state government so as to provide for pari-mutuel horse racing in this state at a limited number of licensed
Regulated industries.
Senate Bill 213 by Senators Harper of the 7th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 10 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to contracts and purchases by public schools so as to provide. Senate Bill 214 by Senators Harper of the 7th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 3 of Chapter 3 of Title 38 of the OCGA relating to governor's emergency powers so as to restrict the use of emergency powers on matters. Senate Bill 215 by Senators Walker the 3rd of the 20th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 31 of the OCGA relating to regulation of hospitals and related institutions so as to authorize.
Health and Human Services.
Senate Bill 216 by Senators Halpern of the 39th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 1A of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to general provisions relative to early care and learning so as to establish an early child
Education and Youth.
Senate Bill 217 by Senators Kennedy of the 18th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 27 of Title 50 of the OCGA relating to bona fide coin operated
Regulated industries.
Senate Bill 218 by Senators Walker the 3rd of the 20th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 5 of Title 45 of the OCGA relating to vacation of office so as to provide for the suspension of compensation for certain
Government
public
oversight.
Senate Bill 219 by Senators Ginn of the 47th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 3 of the OCGA relating to alcoholic beverages so as to provide for regulation of the manufacture.
Regulated industries.
Senate Resolution 129 by Senators Orrock of the 36th and others, a resolution creating the Senate Retirement Security for Georgian Study Committee and for other purposes.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 131 by Senators Mullis of the 53rd and others, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution so as to authorize the General Assembly to provide by law for parimutuel betting on horse
Regulated
racing.
industries.
Senate Resolution 134 by Senators Walker III of the 20th and others, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the State of Georgia so as to provide for the suspension of compensation
Government
for certain.
oversight.
Senate Resolution 135 by Senators Mullis of the 53rd and others, a resolution proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the State of Georgia so as to provide for sports betting in the state, to provide for related
Regulated
matters.
industries.
This completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, first reading of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 111 by Representatives Williamson of the 115th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 7 of the OCGA relating to financial institutions so as to clarify and remove superfluous language, to update terminology, to remove outdated language, to amend Chapter 3.
Banking and banking.
House Bill 165 by Representatives Barr of the 103rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 4 of Article 1 of Chapter 8 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to horns, exhaust systems, mirrors, windshields, tires, safety belts, and emergency absorption.
Transportation.
House Bill 168 by Representatives Petrie of the 166th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 42-5-36 of the OCGA relating to confidentiality of information supplied by inmates, penalties
Public
for breach.
safety.
House Bill 169 by Representatives Corbett of the 174th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 40-5-147 of the OCGA relating to requirements for issuance of commercial driver's license or instruction
Public
permit.
safety.
House Bill 212 by Representatives Carpenter of the 4th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 31-39-4 of the OCGA relating to persons authorized to issue order not to resuscitate.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 353 by Representatives Jones of the 25th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 6 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to driving on the right side of the roadway, overtaking and passing, and following too closely.
Public safety.
This completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, please read reports of standing committees.
Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 157, do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Walker of the 20th. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 157, do pass. House Bill 172, do pass. House Bill 331, do pass. House Bill 357, do pass. House Bill 361, do pass. House Bill 375, do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th. This completes the order.
Mr. Secretary, will you read bills and resolutions for the second time, please?
Senate Bill 28 by Senator Hatchett of the 50th and others, Juvenile Code and Domestic Relations, provisions relating to the protection of children, strengthen, clarify, and update. Senate Bill 40 by Senator Jordan of the 6th and others, elections and primaries, the time and method for opening and tabulating absentee ballots, revise. Senate Bill 42 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, education, school climate rating does not include discipline data, provide. Senate Bill 51 by Senator Thompson of the 14th and others, Dexter-Mosley Act, enact. Senate Bill 59 by Senator Albers of the 56th and others, education, additional QBE funding for each full-time equivalent student with a local charter school, provide. Senate Bill 67 by Senator Walker III of the 20th and others, elections and primaries, submission of identification in connection with absentee ballot applications, provide. Senate Bill 75 by Senator Jackson of the 41st and others, termination of residential lease, victims of stalking, provide. Senate Bill 89 by Senator Miller of the 49th and others, elections and primaries, chief election assistant officer, qualifications, appointment, supervision, and duties, provide. Senate Bill 90 by Senator Jackson of the 2nd and others, Georgia Commission on African American History and Culture, create. Senate Bill 105 by Senator Strickland of the 17th and others, statewide probation system, conditions and procedures under which probation may be terminated early, revise. Senate Bill 114 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others, professions and businesses, grounds for refusing to grant or revoking a license, revise. Senate Bill 115 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others, driver's licenses, instructional course, educating drivers and the public on best practices to implement when interacting with law enforcement officers, provide. Senate Bill 116 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others, Children and Youth Services, registration of maternity supportive house residences to provide housing for pregnant women provide. Senate Bill 119 by Senator Harper of the 7th and others, permit required for burning woods, lands, and marshes or other flammable vegetation except certain yard waste from permitting. Senate Bill 148 by Senator Huffsettler of the 52nd and others, 2021 Special Council on Tax Reform and Fairness for Georgians and the Special Joint Committee on Georgia Revenue Structure create. Senate Bill 184 by Senator Cowsert of the 46th and others, elections and primaries input and credit for voting data, revise the time. Senate Bill 188 by Senator Cowsert of the 46th and others, elections and primaries, election results reporting system to be established and maintained by the Secretary of the State, provide. Senate Resolution 11 by Senator Ginn of the 47th and others, Georgia Recyclers Association, the Georgia Recycling Coalition, and the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries and their employees recognize. Senate Resolution 62 by Senator Jackson of the 2nd and others, Smith, Tommy, recognize. House Bill 265 by Representative Knight of the 130th and others, Revenue and Taxation, Internal Revenue Code, and Internal Revenue Code of 1986 define terms and incorporate certain provisions of federal law into Georgia law. This completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, it's now time for our morning roll call. The chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd on schedule.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, y'all. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the following senators from the 22nd, 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, and 55 for business inside the Capitol, sir.
Without objection, the senators from the 22nd, 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, and 55th are excused. Chair recognizes the Dean of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 2nd.
Without objection, the senator from the 2nd is excused. Are there any additional motions to excuse? The chair sees none. The secretary will call the roll of senators. Signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. Have all senators voted your presence? There it goes. I had the wrong name. My eyes are failing. You're good. All right. Have all senators voted their machine? Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. All right, it's now time for a morning devotional, and I'd ask that all senators take your seats and cease all audible conversations, and doorkeepers, please secure the chamber at this time. I have the honor of leading us in our pledge today and introducing our chaplain of the day. Will you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag, to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, moderation. I have the honor once again today of introducing to this chamber Dr. Charles Gardner. He's a great friend of the Senate, Charles is the founding pastor of Redwood Church, and Redwood is an independent church in the Wesleyan tradition. Prior to starting Redwood, Charles served for 20 years as a pastor in the United Methodist Church, serving 5 different congregations across North Georgia, including 3 right here in the city of Atlanta. This might be the best part of your resume, outside of the theological achievements. George holds a degree from Georgia Tech, the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and the Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. He's a native of Atlanta and resides in Buckhead. His wife, Shannon, works at Chick-fil-A's Support Center, and their son, Zach, is a student at Woodward Academy. Along with being an avid runner and golfer, Charles enjoys spending time with his family as they together pursue their passion for travel, theater, and sporting events. I introduce to you Dr. Charles Gardner.
Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Secretary, Senators, it's a pleasure as always to be with you, and such an honor to get to come as we continue to navigate our way, but beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel, for which I know we are all grateful. It's been a crazy year, and so we come together, and y'all have hard work to do, and we're grateful for the work that you do. I'm just going to bring a few words of encouragement this morning. I don't know. I know that y'all were in session, I think, on Friday, or at least I saw some pictures from the Capitol, so I think things were going on down here. But Friday afternoon, I happened to be at home where I've spent most of the time over the past year, and was flipping through and realized that the Mars Perseverance was getting ready to land, which I'm a huge space buff, and one of the lights, bright spots, one of the silver linings of this has been SpaceX's launches, and to once again launch humans from American soil, and to regain that wonderful sense of exploration that we have as Americans. It's a part of our DNA. And it's named Perseverance. And so I started doing a little research on that. And the name Perseverance actually came from a 7th grader in Virginia named Alexander Mather. And they actually had a press conference March 5th of 2020 in which they awarded him, they went to his school to have a press conference where they announced that he had been the winner of a contest to name that. And think about that, March 5th, 2020. That was as we were beginning to understand that there was some kind of virus in the world that we needed to pay attention to, but had no idea the impacts that it would ultimately have on us. And so I believe in some ways that was prophetic, that this Mars rover was named Perseverance. It also is appropriate in that it takes 7 months and 292.5 million miles for that rover to go from the Earth to Mars. I just, even though I went to Georgia Tech, I often say that I realized when I got to Georgia Tech that I was really not that smart, because there's a lot of really smart people in that school, and a number of them are working on the team that designed, built, launched, and will now operate Perseverance on the surface of the red planet. Perseverance is a part of my faith, of the Christian faith, and read to you this morning these words from Paul's letter to the church in Rome. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand, and we boast in our hope of sharing the glory of God. And not only that, but we also boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. So many have had to persevere through so much over this last year. I'm reminded of a story of a nurse here in Georgia. She's a labor and delivery nurse, and she also has type 1 diabetes. And so a significant comorbidity for COVID is type 1 diabetes. Yet throughout this entire year, she has faithfully worked her 12-hour shifts, wearing an N95 mask and a cloth mask. Often during those 12-hour shifts, the only break that she would take from her mask would be the 10 minutes that she went and ate by herself to take off the mask and eat and to return to her shift. Her husband owns his own business. He's worked 20 years to build a small business that employs on any given time 3 or 4 full-time employees, 2 or 3 part-time employees. The reason that she ate by herself every day during her 12-hour shifts was because her son, who was born premature, who's now 15 and thriving, being born prematurely, his lungs were compromised. He suffers from asthma, and the last thing in the world that she wanted to do was to bring home that virus to her son. That nurse is my wife's twin sister. Her husband, my brother-in-law, their son, my nephew. As I think about perseverance, and I know that this story is told all over our great state and throughout our incredible country, but I wanted to share with you that story this morning because they have been my heroes throughout this past year. Because at times when I was afraid to leave the house, she had to get up and go to work. He had to get up and go to work. They tried to manage their son and make sure that he could continue to learn. That's what perseverance is all about. Their family represents families that are the backbone of our state and the soul of our country. And so this morning, as I come to share a few words with you, I share you the story of my family and what they've done to persevere through this time. And I know, again, there have been much more difficult challenges for so many. But for us to stand by their side, to encourage them, to do what we could to help them along the way. And we're grateful that we were able to do that. And so my call to all of us this morning is that we continue to persevere. I can't remember if I mentioned about 2 weeks ago, or I guess it's about 3 weeks ago now, she got her second dose of vaccine. And so as one of our frontline workers, we feel much better now that she has been vaccinated as she continues to work and serve her patients. And my brother-in-law's business is once again getting back on its feet, and we're grateful for all the many ways they were helped, and my nephew is thriving, as I said. We've all persevered, and we will all continue to persevere. And in the not-too-distant future, my family will be able to go back to concerts and theater and sporting events and do so and enjoy those things. And when we look back on this time, I hope that we look back at those stories of perseverance, that we look back at the ways we came together as Georgians, as Americans, and as human beings, to do things as simple as to go to work and to do things as complex as putting a rover on Mars 292 million miles away, because we are at our best when we work together to accomplish God-sized goals. So I hope that we can all continue to do that together. Will you pray with me? Almighty God, we give you thanks for this day and for these leaders of our great state. I pray that your wisdom would move within this body as they continue to deliberate, as they continue to lead and guide us, as they set policy that makes our lives better and allows us to fully become all that you've created us to be. Watch over and protect them. Watch over and protect our state and all those within it, that we might continue to move toward a time where we can get back to what really matters: faith, family, and friends. We ask all of this in your name. Amen.
Senate will come back to order. Does any senator have a unanimous consent? Chair sees none. Before we get started with points of personal privilege, I want to thank our friends at the Agribusiness Council. I've got a pin up here. You probably can't see it. It's got a tractor on it. And I know that our current ag chair and our former ag chair would be super proud of that pin. And this week also happens to be FFA week. And so grateful for all of our farmers that are represented here. I see one from Valdosta shaking his head over there, and others, Senator from the 13th. But thank you for the FFA and their continued success in educating our youth around I think, our most important industry, and certainly we would all agree, largest industry here in the great state of Georgia. So thanks for the opportunity to support this pin. And another great reminder that every business is a technology company, including the manufacturing of tractors and also how we deliver our ag business all across the great state. So thank you to farmers and FFA all across our great state. Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. My friends of the Senate, when my son was 4 years old, he'd get home from preschool and he'd run immediately to the backyard to the swing set. And when he got that swing going nice and high, he would burst into song. Jesus loves me, yes I know, for the Bible tells me so. It made a mom smile, right? So a year later, he entered public school kindergarten. And one day in February, he got home from school and he ran out to that swing set and he sang at the top of his lungs, "Thank you, Miss Rosa, you are the spark. You started the freedom movement. Thank you, Sister Rosa Parks." I had to giggle. From Jesus to Rosa. Both Jesus and Rosa sparked movements. Jesus being a Middle Eastern Jewish man, and Rosa being a middle-aged black woman. I breathed a sigh of relief that my blonde-haired, blue-eyed son was learning about people who were different from him. My kindergarten was the first desegregated kindergarten in my hometown. Perhaps I noticed the color of the skin of my classmates was different from my own, but I don't remember it really mattering. What I did notice was the beautiful ponytail bands with big balls on the ends that my black classmate Castina wore. And a little later, I was so impressed that my black classmate Keith Williams knew from the time he was in the second grade that he wanted to be a meteorologist. My school, my desegregated school, was offering me the opportunity to live amongst people who were different from me, making me comfortable with those differences and healing our communities at the same time. But what I don't remember learning is about the accomplishments of the brave, smart black leaders. I only learned about famous white people. For instance, I missed the opportunity to learn about Madame C.J. Walker, an important black role model who lived and worked in my city. She was a turn-of-the-century businesswoman, and she made a fortune selling hair products for black women that she developed herself. I'll bet my classmate, Castina, the one with the fascinating hair bands, I bet she would have been inspired by the work of Madame C.J. Walker. And Keith, my classmate, who wanted to be a meteorologist, he didn't get to learn about the Tuskegee Airmen's Weather Detachment, which produced the first black meteorologists. There were missed opportunities for raising black kids up in a society that sadly still beats them down today. When my son was in 3rd grade, I remember the Georgia social studies standards teaching about 12 Americans who expanded freedoms. One was Mary McLeod Bethune, who with only $1.50 in her pocket started a school for black girls, which eventually turned into a college. Her most famous words were, "Invest in the human soul. It might just be a diamond in the rough." Today, I'm sure that Ms. Bethune would advocate this very legislature to fund needs-based scholarships to help talented kids afford college. It is so important to our children, really to all of us, to learn about people who are different from us. Jesus and Rosa Parks, a Jew and a black woman, who both sparked movements. Thank you, Ms. Rosa. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 3rd for a point of personal privilege.
Again, in support of Black Week Matters, I wanted to introduce you to the two of the ones I did not have time in my 3 minutes to do last week, and I would like to talk to you about these two. Camden County resident Corporal Johnny Robinson. He is a World War II vet, honored with many badges and honors. Some people felt that we could not fight for our country because they thought black soldiers didn't have time to fight, Johnny said. He said more African Americans serving in the military were butlers, servants, and truck drivers, but Johnny was in the anti-aircraft artillery. He served in Okinawa, where he was part of one of the bloodiest invasions of the war. Johnny says, "I was proud to be a soldier. I did my duty, and I had no trouble fighting for my country." The next one is Mcintosh County State Patrolman Captain Thornell King, who is affectionately known as TK. He has served as State Patrol for 28 years. He's a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, where he played basketball. He returned to Mcintosh County and taught and coached for 5 years. TK is known for his love for others in his community. He has a large piece of plywood that hangs in front of his dad's seafood market with messages of inspiration and free giveaways. Here are a few of his messages that he puts out. Free hot dogs, hamburgers, fries, and drinks to all trick-or-treaters. No food for Thanksgiving? Call TK, 912-230-4660. No child without a toy at Christmas? Call TJ. Free 2 pounds of shrimp to any cancer survivor. The list goes on and on with him. My aide, Dr. Leslie, had the joy of helping TK and others at Christmas toys to children in Mcintosh, and there was TK frying shrimp, fish, hush puppies, and all the trimmings for the children and their families. Others have joined TK in his relentless and unselfish fight for those who've fallen on hard times. Please take the time to read the resolution. It is heartfelt and heartwarming, and it shows the true compassion of TK and the community and the other three that we are supporting. I humbly ask you to sign the resolution for those well-deserved citizens, not only my district, but for their outstanding commitment to make Georgia proud to call their own. I should have that with me tomorrow.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 2nd for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, while we seek to encourage and support bipartisan legislation, the newly proposed absentee and voting regulation bills proposed by some of our colleagues are nothing short than targeted voter suppression. This election cycle, we saw what happens when we restore people's confidence in the voting system and give them the ability to cast their ballots, whether absentee, whether voting in person. Georgians spoke this election cycle. The record-breaking number of voter turnout, both through absentee and in-person voting, speaks for itself, no matter what the party affiliation. Thus, we cannot afford to be silent in this matter. Absentee voting gives all Americans the chance to have their voices heard without being concerned about missing work, family functions, giving peace of mind to those who are out of state working or those who are out of state going to school. And also it gives peace of mind to those who have health care concerns, that they can vote with comfort and protection at home. And my friends, this is nothing new. It is done in Colorado. It is done in Washington State. It is done in Washington State, Colorado, Oregon. Absentee ballot works. And it works for the people of this country. We should give the people the opportunity to work and vote. That's our job as legislators. Eliminating no-excuse absentee ballot would be a great disservice to those who would be extremely financially impacted if unable to utilize absentee ballot. To do otherwise would be forcing them to make a choice, missing work and losing money, or giving an opportunity to give them their constitutional right, and that is to vote. In addition, the elimination of drop boxes will cause similar hardship on Georgians, whether this hardship is postage or concerns about timely arrival of the absentee ballot. Drop boxes give voters confidence that their vote will be received, and not only received, it gives them the confidence that their vote will be counted. Proposed legislation to eliminate many of these boxes, which historically have proven that the greatest impacted people would be the people of African American ancestry. This is simply a blatant and deliberate infringement of Georgians' voting rights. I stand with many others under this gold dome, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, in their desire to protect and defend our elections' legitimacy. But we will not do this at the expense of Georgians, nor their ability to vote and shape the future as they see fit. We urge, colleagues, I urge you, colleagues, that we reconsider these proposed legislations that are surely unfair, and let's start doing stuff that's going to promote bipartisanship and promote an honest election for all Georgians. Thus, we can live in this country that we call free and proud. Mr. President, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 48th for the purpose of introducing the Doctor of the Day.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I am so delighted to be able to introduce our Doctor of the Day today, one of my constituents from Senate District 48, Dr. Michael R. Bakit. Dr. Michael Bakit is a sports medicine physician with Kaiser Permanente of Georgia. He's been a Permanente physician for 6 years. As a specialist in sports-related injuries, Dr. Bakit works with patients to optimize recovery, return to sport, and to prevent injury. Dr. Bakit is also the lead physician for the Health Connect Essentials Initiative. This highly successful program is aimed at training physicians to use the electronic medical record, or EMR system, more effectively. With a team of physician trainers spanning different specialties, Dr. Bakit has worked to improve physician job satisfaction and decrease burnout, which is a hugely important issue. Dr. Bakit lives in Lawrenceville and enjoys sports. He has to do sports. He is a sports medicine doc, after all. He enjoys cooking and spending time with his wife and 3 young sons. Thank you so much, Dr. Bakit, for your service. I hope no one needs you today, but please don't hesitate to seek him out. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 8th for a point of personal privilege.
Mr. President, I promise to make this brief. I just wanted to come to the well today. Many of you know that I'm a South Georgia farmer, 7th generation, and I wanted to express my dismay with the ITC and their ruling against the American blueberry farmers. farmers across Georgia and indeed across the nation. It was it was states, California, all of us, we came together and formed the American Blueberry Alliance to try to bring this case before the ITC. In 2010, there was 1.8 million pounds of blueberries that came into this country. Last year, it was almost 60 million pounds, and we've seen our prices decrease proportionately. And it is amazing to me how we as a nation can think that the American farmer can compete with a country that has a minimum wage that's less than $1 an hour, doesn't have to have Tier 4 emission standards and all those kind of things than we do as the American farmer, but yet we're not going to protect them. It has huge implications for rural Georgia. The senator from the 7th represents an area, along with myself, that the blueberry industry is about a $750 million a year industry in 10 counties down there, but it also it's all of our squash, bell pepper, all of our farmers, and we know that Georgia's our #1 industry. And so if our government is not going to protect the American farmer, I just wanted to take to the well and implore our Georgians and everybody across this country that although you may not have had a vote in that ITC hearing, you do have a vote every day you go into the grocery store, and you can vote with your pocketbook. The American family farm is indeed the economic engine of rural Georgia, and it's the economic engine of rural America. It affects our tax digest, it affects our part stores, our you name it, everything. And so, when you go into the grocery store and you vote with your dollars, you're supporting rural America, and I just ask that you do that. And thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
All right, you've got a consent calendar of privileged resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to adoption of the resolutions on the consent calendar? Chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? Chair sees none. You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to any bill on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? Chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. The questions on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Hallway, look, got a thumbs up in the hallway. Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 45, the nays are 4. And the bills having received the requisite constitutional majority are therefore passed. We are now moving on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, please read the caption of Senate Resolution 28.
Senate Resolution 28 by Senator Calzert of the 46th and others, a resolution requesting that the United States Congress call a convention under Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States limited to proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the United States to set a limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member of the United States House of Representatives, and to set a limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member of the United States Senate and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Government Oversight recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harbin of the 16th.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 46th to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I'm honored to come before you this morning to present two different applications for amendment conventions. I'm going to speak generally about the subject matter and the process that would apply to both of these applications, we call them, first, and then I'll get into the subject matter of Senate Resolution 28. And after that vote, I'll come back and address Senate Resolution 29. It's probably one of the most misunderstood provisions in the United States Constitution is how is the Constitution amended? And everybody is familiar with the process where the Congress itself can, by a 2/3 vote, propose changes to the constitutions or amendments to the Constitution, and then submit those proposed amendments to the states for ratification. We had a debate here 2 years ago about the Equal Rights Amendment, which was one of the last proposed amendments that the United States Congress presented to the states for ratification, and 3/4 of the states did not ratify that, so it did not become an amendment. I think we all should recall that when the Constitution was created, back in Philadelphia at the convention there, they knew, these framers of the Constitution, that this document would be a living document and would need to change with the times and to address new situations, new problems, new things that arose during the course of history. We also knew that we wanted it to be difficult to amend the Constitution because that was the contract that the states, the 13 original states, formed with each other. And it set forth the whole concept of federalism, that we created a federal government that would have certain powers that the states surrendered to the federal government, and we had certain rights left to the states. We also had a Bill of Rights that set forth certain rights that neither state nor federal governments could violate. They belong to the citizens, because we are a country of the governed. It is by the people, for the people, that we consent to the government of the federal government and the state governments. But we knew that there would need to be changes over time. For example, of course, women didn't have the right to vote back in 1776. And as our society evolved and women's rights were recognized, then we amended the Constitution to allow that. And that's just one example of the many amendments that have occurred over the years. But we didn't want them to be easy, so the first method was by a 2/3 vote of both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, so there would be strong support. And then, even if proposed, 3/4 of the states, or 38 of the 50 states, would have to agree to it. Well, the other path that's set out there in Article 5 that has not been used is that in the event that Congress does not propose an amendment, the states have the power. They have the power to call a convention of the states an amendment convention to address proposing amendments that Congress won't propose. And if 2/3 of the states, 34 of the states, apply to Congress to call for that type of convention, an amendment convention, then Congress must act, and they can set the time and the place of where that amendment convention would be. This is most important in issues that Congress is hesitant to act, where they are unlikely to limit their own power. Now, bear in mind that our government was a collection of states that agreed to be bound together and to give certain powers to the federal government. The states still run the show. We are the members of this federation. At once it was the Articles of Confederation when we first got started that have granted certain powers to this federal government. So these states retain the power to amend the Constitution going forward if necessary. Now, once the states meet to propose an amendment, that still has to be sent back to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. Some of you may have received emails from a group called Eagle Forum. I think it's based out on the West Coast. similar to the John Birch Society back in the day here in the Southeast. It's a extreme conservative organization that fears a runaway convention. And they claim that if you were to support one of these amendment conventions, that the states might run wild, and they might propose all kinds of different amendments to the Constitution that could vastly change our government. And they used the original Constitutional Convention as their example for that. Look what happened out of the Articles of Confederation. The next thing you do, we have formed the United States of America with a new Constitution. That convention of states that set forth this grand document that we all live by now was for the purpose of reforming the government, because it wasn't working. It wasn't just called for the purpose of tweaking or amending the Articles of Confederation. It was to revamp and find a system of government that would work. And it was called by the states themselves, not by Congress at the time. And they had already begun their work before Congress consented to that convention. So when people tell you, look what happened the last time we did this, we ended up with a new Constitution, that is a false narrative to tell you that this type of amendment convention could run out of hand like that, because that one was designed for that purpose, and it worked fabulously, the system of government we set up. So in these resolutions, there are two guarantees that that will not happen. So if you're getting these emails from other places in the country, folks are fearful of a runaway convention, here's your response. In Senate Resolution 28, the second line, it's requesting that Congress call this amendment convention limited to one purpose: to set a limit on the number of terms that a person can serve in the House of Representatives or in the United States Senate. Now, this is looking at the federal government, don't be fearful about you're about to term limit yourself out. This is the federal government, where those representatives and senators are embedded for a long period of times, and they feel entitled that they own those seats. The reason is that 94% of incumbents in the United States Congress win their reelection bids, because that's where the money goes to. If you want influence with Congress, your best bet is on an incumbent, because it costs so much money now to run an effective congressional race or U.S. Senate race that the incumbents get the money, and nobody can justly challenge them. That's not the intent when we set up the United States Congress, that people would be there for 30 years at a time. These were citizen farmers, much like we're citizen legislators, and they would go to Congress and serve during the winter months, generally speaking, when it wasn't planting or harvesting time, because we had an agrarian economy. Most of them served just 1, 2, 3 terms at most and went back to their daily lives, as many of us do. Now it's gotten to where there are people that essentially stay as long as they want to. Now, from the Republican side, you hear Donald Trump's campaign theme was, let's drain the swamp. We got people up there that are corrupt, that are embedded, they're not even working together, they're dysfunctional. Let's give some new people a chance, some fresh ideas, some new blood. So you get a lot of Republican support for this. Now listen to me when I tell you, this is not a partisan issue. Polling has been done by the U.S. Term Limits Organization that shows almost 85%, in the neighborhood of 85% of all voters. And when you break it down in Democratic voters and break it down in Republican voters, our constituents on both sides of the aisle agree we need to limit the terms of United States congressmen and United States senators. This application simply calls for a convention of the states to have that debate, because Congress isn't going to have it. They are not going to term limit themselves out of office. They feel entitled to those positions. Well, they're not. Now, this doesn't set forth a certain number of terms. It doesn't set forth the number of terms a United States senator could hold office or a member of the House of Representatives. It leaves that up to this convention to be debated and discussed. You know, it doesn't say that it would apply to somebody, in midterm. Could be just when anybody newly elected. Those details will be worked out by the convention of the states. So if you're worried that this might run amok somehow, you're only saying that you don't trust your fellow citizens. That representatives from all 50 states can reach agreement, and then 3/4 of the states would adopt or ratify that. That is democracy. And if they can't reach agreement, then no amendment would be proposed to be considered by the states. Because this application is specific, we are asking for a convention of the states to propose one limited subject matter amendment. You don't have any consideration or worries about it running away. And it asks that this be aggregated to reach the 2/3 vote, the 34 states needed to force Congress's hand on this, only with other states that are also asking for that single issue for term limits. That should give you peace of mind that this is narrowly focused to deal with only one issue. And whatever the states in attendance agree to propose, if a majority of them propose it, then 3/4 of our states would have to go along with that before we amend the Constitution. Now, there's another way that we guarantee, or we can be certain, that in the state of Georgia, we would not exceed this scope or call of the amendment convention. This is not a new issue, by the way. Amending the United States Constitution has come before this body many times over the years. The last time that I was engaged in this was back in 2014. And we had 3 different applications for amendment conventions that passed on the same day for different subject matters. This was one of those subject matters. And to respond to these concerns of a runaway convention, we passed a bill that set forth how Georgia would select its delegates once Congress calls a convention, and to limit their authority. So I refer you to the official code of Georgia, Title 28-6-8, that provides the mechanisms for appointing our delegates and binds them to live up to their oath of office and only consider amendments within the scope of our call. And what we have done is give them an oath of office where they must say that they will not vote to allow consideration of or to approve any unauthorized proposed amendment, any amendment not authorized by this application you're voting on today. It also says violation of that oath is a criminal violation, false swearing, anytime you're swearing under oath falsely. So they would subject themselves to criminal prosecution if they violated that oath, and it gives our legislature the power to recall them, bring them back from the convention and say, you are no longer authorized to act as a delegate for the state of Georgia. This prevents any possibility of a runaway type convention. Our delegates, when this happens, and it may happen on multiple subjects in the coming years, we don't know at this point, we will have 2 appointed by the Speaker of the House, 2 appointed by the President of the Senate, 2 appointed by the Governor. And then those 6 between themselves will elect a 7th. So we would send a 7-member delegation fairly representing the interest of the state of Georgia. They don't have to be legislators, they can be citizens, they could be judges, they could be legislators, whoever those bodies found suitable to appoint. But they would only have 1 vote. And we only, in this Delegate Limitation Act, will agree to participate in conventions limited to single subject matters. So that's kind of the history, the civics lesson for the day, so to speak. It's surprising how few of us, even as elected officials, know the United States Constitution well enough to be fluent on this method of amendments. It's time for us to consider it. It's time to do it. And all we're asking with this application is that Congress call a convention of states to amend the Constitution considering only that single subject matter. We want to be aggravated with the other states, and all I'm asking is let's let the states have this debate. Give them a chance. Give them a chance, since Congress wants to reach an agreement to limit the terms of office. And it may be that the states decide that that's a bad idea, that they don't agree that that's necessary. But when 2/3 of the states ask for that opportunity, let's let them have the debate and decide whether that's a good idea and what the term limits ought to be. So I ask for your favorable consideration of this application, Senate Resolution 28. With that, Mr. President, if there are no questions, I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 21st for a question.
Senator Yield,
I yield.
thank you for that great civics lesson today.
Thank you.
On lines 31 through 34, when the application meets the 2/3 limit, I guess 34 states, that automatically triggers the speaker to call for this convention?
It requires the United States Congress
To call for the convention?
And you point out what I mentioned earlier there on lines 33 and 34, only when 2/3 have made applications on the same subject.
Okay.
We don't want this aggravated with other ideas that other states might have.
Senator, continue to yield?
Yes, sir.
So then if 34 gets to 34 and it triggers it, then all 50 states are invited, even if they did not apply
Exactly.
for a convention, correct?
That's true. They're invited to it, and they will have their own rules of how they select delegates, but it's designated that the call will have one vote per state.
Per state, okay. And then finally, you touched a little bit on it, but we're a part-time legislature, so
Yes.
we have turnover, and we've seen a lot of turnover in my 8 years here, whereas in Congress, it's a full-time job, so they get accustomed to staying there. Is that correct in your opinion?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's part of the dysfunction there.
Right.
Is it's become a full-time job, and they spend much less time back in the
district.
real world where we live.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for your favorable consideration, and with that, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 52nd to speak to Senate Resolution 28.
I'll make my comments really about both of them as well, if that's okay. And I think, the only senator that's been to a planning convention for the Convention of States out in Phoenix, Arizona, several years ago. But I do believe that that term limits are a tool that can be used for the control of too much embeddedness and not turnover. I hear from so many constituents that want that. I think the debt that the federal government has right now is the biggest threat to our country. Not China, not COVID, but the debt is. 20% of all dollars that were printed in the U.S. were printed last year. And we've now, I think it might have been mentioned, for the first time, we've gone higher than the World War II debt. A World War is certainly a time to accumulate debt, but the continued imbalance of revenue and spending is reaching the breaking point now that it's over 100% of the GDP. You know, we had a sequestration, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, where they put some limits in there, and the debt was actually coming down. It had been over $1 trillion, and it was coming down to 800, 600. Actually, it got down 5 years ago to 400 billion. It was going in the right direction, but nobody could stand it up there, Republicans and Democrats alike. It was taking away things they wanted to do, and so they tweaked the bill, and ever since then it has climbed every single year to out of control levels. Now 27.8 trillion as of January 22nd of this year, and we now spend more on interest in the federal government, more on interest than we do on Medicaid. It's eating up the federal budget, at the lowest interest rates we've ever had. If the Federal Reserve reaches the point, and they're going to, where they can't keep inflation down and interest rates go up, you know, some of that stuff they're paying 0.8% interest on. You don't have to rise too much to where it takes the entire federal revenue just to pay the interest on it. One of the things that has really hurt, you know, we have our TRS here. I've been on retirement for many years, chaired it for a couple of years, and we have a good funding, and we fight over it and try to keep it in place. We've got the ERS, we've got all these other retirement systems that are funded. What's happened with Social Security is they've taken that money and borrowed it to help with its debt, so that now, you know, Social Security might be making 0.8% interest on money from this other group, and so that's why the trust fund is going bad. We can average about 7-8%. We've actually got one of our funds up 22% this year so far, but we can average 7 or 8%. We can build up reserves to try to stay ahead of this as a state. The federal government has no reserves. They took that money and sent it away, saying that it was borrowed. It really hurts. You know, the thing that those in the stock market would say, well, it's helped the stock market. It does, because there's nowhere else you can put your money and make anything other than Bitcoin or something, I guess. But the bonds have certainly been hurt, and it really hurts the retirees because they can't make the money they could on their fixed income. Besides the people it's hurting, and besides the fact of Social Security is going bankrupt because it wasn't invested like we do as a state, the fact of the matter is that I think the state's the only people that can fix this. Our day of reckoning is coming real soon on this. When we increase the debt 40% in the last 4 years, we're snowballing towards a tough time, and I hope that somebody can get the attention up in D.C. of both parties, and they're equally to blame for this, that we can get their attention and put some rules in place to try to get this under control. It is fixable. It was fixed in the 90s, and then the people that were fixing it weren't there anymore, and money took over. I hope you'll consider voting yes on this bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd to speak to Senate Resolution 28.
You, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Some of the, points in favor of term limits have been made this morning, and I think there are some things that are worth talking about as it relates to term limits. So I'm up here to present the contrary point of view because there are a lot of things that I think could be negative repercussions of term limits. First of all, any term limit would need to be quite long because, as all of us know, it takes allow a long tenure, because as all of us know, it takes a while getting in this building to learn the processes and develop the relationships and develop the knowledge base and expertise to have any authoritative voice on an issue. And most importantly, as part of that, I think, are actually the relationships. We understand how much relationships really drive policy making, being able to go to other legislators and say, would you like to work on this, or develop across the aisle compromise. That really requires more than just day one in a chamber. More importantly than that, though, I think, is that the true problem that we have in American politics, where incumbents continually get reelected, is not so much a problem of term limits. When you impose term limits, you effectively disenfranchise the voters by telling them you may not elect this person anymore, even if they're happy with that individual's representation. The reason that there's so much incumbent protection in our system is really a function of the money in the system. That's the bigger obstacle. The reason it's so hard to defeat an incumbent, yes, some of it comes from the I by their name, some of it comes from the ability to have a staff to reach out to and handle constituent concerns and do town halls, but all of that is actually a good thing. If you're doing your job where you are connecting with people in your district as it relates to their problems and keeping them informed, then that's really the type of legislator that they would want to reelect. The bigger problem is just that the money flows to the incumbents. We have very little controls on money, and then therefore it's very difficult and at times insurmountable for any challenger to defeat that person. So if you want to talk about what's broken in our system, what's sort of rotten in our system that leads to some of the problems that the term limits would be aiming to fix, it's really the unfettered money, especially out of big special interests. So, and paradoxically, when you impose term limits, all that happens is you empower the big money special interests more, because then they become the institutional players within the system. They're the ones that then know the process, have the base of knowledge, and you see it every time when that happens. We all see how much we need to rely on lobbyists within our chamber. We're not given policy staff. That's something that y'all know I have decried many times over the years. We do not have any real policy staff within our offices so that we can have an independent view of legislation. Many of us are forced to rely on, and we do a lot at one time, so many of us are forced to rely on people in the halls who have been hired by someone who can pay them to flag an issue for us. So when you've got the term limits, you are empowering those special interests that can afford to pay people to sit in the halls even more, to run to less astute legislators by virtue of the fact that they don't have much tenure behind them and understand much about it. You empower all of them more to really run the building. And that's really the antithesis of actually being people-powered, where decisions are driven by what the voters want. Those are just a few points, colleagues, about why it really is a complicated issue. It's not so cut and dried of, they're not free to vote their will when their eye is all on re-election. It's really a much larger problem, and I would posit to you that the biggest issue of all is the money in the system. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy to yield for any questions if there are any.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 32nd for a question.
Thank you, Senator. Would you yield?
Certainly, Senator.
Yes, I just had a question about one thing that you said about that we don't have any policy assistance here. And I am a heavy user of our Senate Research Department, and I hope that everyone knows that that's a great resource that we have in the Senate for policy advice.
Yeah, I do agree. We have one office that serves all 56 of us. I think they do the best they can. But I would say that at times when I've tried to dig into certain things, they have not been able to do what I needed them to do.
Do you continue to yield?
Certainly.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 34th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Senator, is it not true that we have colleagues who was elected, came into the chamber saying that they were going to turn themselves out, that they were not going to do so many years, they would just term themselves out? In other words, they are limiting themselves as to how many terms they plan to run. Is that not true?
That I believe the senator knows of what she speaks.
Senator, is it not further true that every 2 years, because we do have to run both federally and state, we can be termed out by the voters, because that's what voters do. They choose every 2 years who they want to represent them in the state as well as the federal level as it relates to the general body of the U.S. Congress. Is that not true?
Yes, the senator is correct that our terms are 2 years long.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 36th to speak to Senate Resolution 28.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to raise some points about this seemingly innocuous and wonderful pot at the end of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow story that we've heard about what a constitutional amendment would do. I say danger, danger. Who are we fooling? When this country is as polarized and we have seen the shenanigans that we've just witnessed as a nation around the election, 18 states seeking to overturn the elections, trying to overturn Georgia's elections, and we don't think there's a lot of shenanigans going on out here that would get reflected and amplified in a constitutional convention. If you don't understand that, you're fooling yourself. The special interests would take over a constitutional convention. Believe you me. Believe you me. I'd like to just, you heard my colleague speak about the term limits proposal. I want to really address my remarks more to the question of the balanced budget, and we've got two resolutions before us and the author will speak to the second one, I'm sure, when that resolution is called up. But the only constitutional convention we've ever had in 1787 went beyond its mandate. They got in there and basically did what they wanted to, and a convention held today could set its own agenda as well. Powerful, well-funded interest groups will be there. You can count on that to process and press for changes to the agenda. Why do you think the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, the infamous ALEC, has been pushing for this for 10 years? Why do you think that? Think about that. Think about that there's a reason, and that is that the special interests that fund ALEC and drive ALEC would love to open up, have a constitutional convention and open up to change policy through that pathway. Chief Justice Berger, we all remember him, he said a constitutional convention today would be a free-for-all for special interest groups and likely to enact changes that are far more sweeping than many legislators supporting these resolutions would typically envision. Late Justice Antonin Scalia, not in our memories, just recently left us. And he said in 2014, I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. Whoa, who knows what would come out of it? It was highly unpredictable in his view 6-7 years ago. What would he be saying now? And no other body, including our court system across this country, has clear authority over what would happen in a convention and what a convention would do. But moving on down to one of the big arguments you hear, the term limits, we need a constitutional convention to set term limits on Congress. Secondly, that we need a balanced budget. Now, what is the truth behind a balanced budget, which sounds so wonderful? Sounds so wonderful, a balanced budget, what everybody wants. It would require the federal government to balance its budget every year. And what it would do is harm our economy. We don't need to participate willy-nilly in a process that's going to create another hammer on our economy. This kind of amendment risks tipping weak economies into recession, making recessions longer and deeper, causing very large job losses. It would force policymakers to cut spending, raise taxes, or both when the economy turns down. Now that sounds nice, doesn't it? But it's the exact opposite of what sound economic policy would advise. These actions launch a vicious spiral. Budget cuts or tax increases in a recession cause the economy to contract further, triggering still higher deficits, forcing policymakers to institute additional austerity measures, which in turn cause greater contraction. Right now, we're working mightily to push out a relief package in the face of this pandemic. And that will happen. We saw relief packages, the CARES package, in 2020. If we hadn't had that, our budget would be tanking here because we had revenues coming in from the feds to support the survival of families, institutions, businesses, and the healthcare system in the midst of this pandemic. How do you think we would have built the interstate system? How are we going to address our infrastructure going forward? Most of these places that are states that are passing this, people sit up and vote for it thinking it'll never, I can vote for this because it's never going to really happen. Well, I would say don't fool yourself. If we required if a balanced budget amendment came out, it would require that federal spending in any year be offset by revenues collected in that same year. So there's a host of problems that come from that. Social Security would effectively be prevented from drawing down its reserves from previous years to pay benefits in a later year. And we could be seeing Social Security benefits cut because enough money hadn't come in that year. But it would disallow the use of the reserves of money that had come in another year. Even with this ample balance in the trust funds, that they would be forced to cut Social Security. And the same is true for Medicare Part A and for military retirement. Danger, danger. Do you want to see cuts there? Civil service retirement programs. The FDIC or the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation could not quickly respond to bank or pension funds failures by using its assets to pay deposit or pension insurance. It goes on and on. And they argue that, families balance their budget every year and only spend what they get. But guess what? How many people have a mortgage? That is taking out a long-term loan to pay for the roof over your head and to build an asset. That's not just based on what you earned that year. So the federal government would be barred from borrowing to make worthy investments, even if those investments have substantial future payoffs. And as with Social Security, the amendment would prohibit using past savings for current purchases. So this is a bad idea on so many fronts. And I would say to you, the concerns around the deficit, were y'all up and hollering around the deficit when Trump increased the deficit by 40% in 4 years? Did we hear a big clarion call down here in Georgia from the majority party to stop this nonsense? No. No, he was applauded. He was applauded. So you can't have it both ways. Balanced budget sounds great, but the truth of the matter on the ground would be a devastating situation that would have crippled us right now in the midst of this pandemic. So it's an ideological bill. It's pushed by ALEC. They've been kicking it around for 10 years. I imagine we'll have a party line vote on this. And I say to you, Democrats are standing up for common sense and for not turning over the entire structures under which we as a government work and thrive. I'll take any questions. If there are none, I'll yield the well.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th to speak to Senate Resolution 28.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was not planning to speak to this. I was out in the hallway and was troubled enough that I felt this was worthy of some attention. I'm still new to this job, and I'm still kind of constantly surprised by what I hear sometimes come from this well. And I agree with the previous speaker. This is an ideological issue. But I am a little bit dumbfounded that I've heard this morning the defense of deficit spending, soaring debt, and career politicians. Danger, danger is what was said. The danger, danger is not a balanced budget. The danger, danger is $22 trillion in national debt. That's the danger. And that's been brought to us by career politicians who are supported in primaries and their elections 9-1 by their challengers. Somebody previously spoke about the challenge of money in the system. That's exactly right. The Supreme Court has ruled, though, that that's the right to free speech. So that's not going away. The ideological difference, quite frankly, colleagues, is the ideological worldview between career politicians and 320 million Americans. 82% of Americans support term limits. As the sponsor of the bill said, this is not a partisan issue. The system is broken. The danger is the system, and the system needs to be disrupted, and Washington, D.C. will never disrupt itself. Danger is exactly right. This country is in danger, and it is in danger by the people that have gone to D.C. to do a job, have turned away from every political promise they ever made because they fell in love with the power. They will never give up the power. This republic was founded upon the sovereignty of the states, and it is up to the states to take back their sovereignty and do what the very founders envisioned. I've never spoken to a founder of this country, but I can imagine if we told the founders that we would be $22 trillion in debt and we would still be arguing over whether or not we have a balanced budget, I believe they would think we have lost our collective minds. And when it comes to government spending in this country, we have absolutely lost our collective minds. Now, we've seen an example of this right here in our own very chamber. An example, a counter argument, if you will, in real life. Because I can give an intellectual consideration to this idea of institutional knowledge. If only we send our politicians to Congress for decades and decades and decades, only then will they be able to do this job effectively. Because despite the talent in this country and despite the intellectual rigor by many of our fellow citizens, we are the only people smart enough after decades of time here and in Washington, D.C. to do this job effectively. And it would empower the bureaucrats if we were to term limit either ourselves or those in D.C. I can understand the intellectual thought behind that, and I could give that some vigor. However, we saw tragically last year a fourth-year senator have to step in and do the toughest job under this building, under the roof of this building. And he stepped in and he did it with honor and dignity and intellectual honesty and excellence with hardly any notice. So if we have somebody in their second term able to carry the hardest job under this building with no notice, I believe that obliterates the argument that only institutional knowledge can save this country. So I will echo the sentiment of the previous speaker, but I come to a different conclusion. The danger bells have been warning, and absolutely, this is a Republican and Democrat problem. President Obama was guilty and President Trump was guilty. The deficit spending is out of control. Washington, D.C. has proven to us that they will not solve the problem. The founders knew that that was a possibility, and the founders gave us this mechanism, and it's time we utilize it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair sees none. Author waives, closing debate. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor of the resolution vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. Have all senators voted? Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the adoption of the resolution, the yeas are 34, the nays are 20. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Resolution 29?
Senate Resolution number 29 by Senator Cowsert of the 46th and others, a resolution applying for a convention of the states under Article 5 of the United States Constitution and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Government Oversight recommends that this resolution do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harbin of the 16th. This completes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 46th to speak to Senate Resolution 29.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for your votes. That was the hard one. This is the easy one. The reason that was hard is because that voted for that each recognized that you don't own these seats you're sitting in, and those congressmen don't own the seats they're sitting in, and the senators don't own them. They have no entitlement to those. We're elected by the people as long as we properly serve them, and those limits will keep us in our lanes if we can reel Congress back in so it will become a functioning body again. Now, this application is for the single purpose of allowing the states to have the debate how to reel in this unbelievably runaway spending on the federal level. And it's not so much a liberal versus conservative idea. It's, are we willing to be adults? Are we willing to be responsible with the resources of this country, to spend those that are either given to us from our taxpayers or taken from our taxpayers at our commands, living within our means? 49 out of the 50 states have balanced budget amendments, including Georgia. We do it every year. It's not always comfortable. It is sometimes painful. Last year we cut the budget 10%. We cut our pay 10% because we weren't going to spend more than we brought in. And our state has kept clicking right along. It's still the best state in the country to do business. All of our government services have continued being delivered. And this year, when things got better in the midstream correction, we restored 60% of those cuts, over $600 million back. But we lived within our budget. We live responsibly, and things are looking bright ahead. The good work of our appropriations chairman and the committee. We're hopeful that revenues will continue increasing and we'll again be able to restore full funding to education and the other areas of this state government that we deem to be our priorities. So why can't the federal government do that? Well, they don't have the parameters, the limitations that we have. We start with the budget revenue estimate from the governor. How much money do we anticipate's coming in, and that's how much we agree to spend. And we do have an exception. One of the senators, I think from the 36, mentioned sometimes there's a need to invest in infrastructure, capital projects that by their very nature are massive in cost but can be paid for over a period of years because they have a long lifespan. When you get your mortgage, buy that house, who's able to write a check for $150,000 or $200,000 for their house? Nobody, but that house lives for generations. And if you spread the payments over 15, 20, 30 years, you have equity in that asset. We are allowed to do that here in Georgia. Now, we're capped. Think about it when you sign off on the bond package in our budget. That is debt. That's borrowing, but it's only allowed for specific purposes. Capital investments, infrastructure, and it's paid for over time. And we have a limitation in our budget, in our Constitution, that we can't spend more than 10% of the previous year's revenues to service the debt. The United States government doesn't have that limitation. I would suggest, if the states are allowed to have this convention to discuss a balanced budget amendment, that it have a provision for capital projects and for a limitation of debt to fund those type of projects. This application also carves out exceptions for national emergencies, like we're in right now for COVID. There are times when you are confronted with emergencies where it makes sense to borrow money for the survival of the country. National defense is another exception. And that reflects me back to the last time our budget deficit exceeded 100% of our gross domestic product. It just did it right now. The last time was 1945, when we were fighting the Axis powers from taking over the world, had been bombed at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Empire, and were fighting for the literal survival of the Western world. Those type of expenditures in this application calls for those exceptions to be made. Excuse me. The other obvious exception is we can't go cold turkey. We can't just slam on the brakes and go from spending twice as much as we're bringing in to zero, but we can gradually reduce that. And most scholars that look at a balanced budget amendment, how you could effectively do it would be to have a gradual glide path down where you gradually reduced that debt till you got down to living within your means. Every household does that. If you get a pay cut or get laid off, you cut your spending. You have to, because you're adults. You're responsible. The comment was made by the senator from the 36th, where was I in the past when Donald Trump was in office? I was right here in this well this time last year when Donald Trump was the president, railing against the same problem and voting in favor of this amendment, which did not pass. I was involved in this movement since 2010, and this did not come from ALEC or any conservative organization at all. This came from the National Conference of State Legislators. Many of you attend the summit. I have served on the board for years. It's equally divided between Democrats and Republicans in that organization. There was a program one year that I attended at the National Summit in Chicago, and the speaker addressed the concerns of the federal budget deficit. And it was brought out at that time that the last time the United States of America had a balanced budget was 1992. Bill Clinton was the president and supported it and signed it into law. John Kasich, who subsequently became the governor of Ohio, was the budget chairman in the House of Representatives. The Republicans had control of the House at that time. And they passed a balanced budget. And sadly, 28 years have passed and we have not had another single year where we balanced our budget. All I'm asking here is we give the states the opportunity to exercise the checks and balances given to them in the Constitution, to have a meeting, to debate this issue, and see if consensus can be reached on an amendment that makes sense, that doesn't cripple our economy or cripple Social Security or cripple other spending problems. And if they can reach agreement, then present it to the states. And if 3/4 of the states agree, let's make it the law. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own people? Are we afraid of democracy? If 3/4 of our country wants this, why wouldn't we agree? Are we some superior, knowledgeable people because we're fortunate enough to sit in these seats that we don't think the Americans can decide what's good for them? You know, the interesting thing about elections, you're going to be hearing all kind of election bills. The interesting thing is that we love democracy when we get our way. When our side wins, amen, power to the people. When we don't, oh no, let's don't let them run away with our state or our country and destroy our fabric of our civilization. We're governed by ourselves. If you don't have the faith in the people of the United States of America to make these decisions, and when 3/4 of them support it, to go along with that super majority, then you don't need to be living in a democracy, because that's what Americans believe in. All I'm asking, let's ask Congress to call a convention of states where this issue of our financial ruining, our profligate spending, can be addressed and debated to see if there's some parameters that an amendment can be proposed. And then let's let the people speak. I think most comments have been made on this subject matter in response to the previous resolution. But I point out a couple of things. That figure, we're in the $22 or $3 trillion in deficits. Those don't just go away. That is over $84,000 per person. I just had my first grandson. He owes $84,000 and he's never spent a dime yet or made a dime. Now, we're going to have to somehow pay that down. If not, what's going to happen? Inflation's going to go up. Interest rates are going to go up. The value of the dollar is going to go down. It's going to take more dollars to buy things. So your spending power is going to go down if we don't get this under control somehow. I ask for your favorable consideration, Mr. President. I'll yield the well, but I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I'll be glad to the rules, Chairman.
Thank you. A couple of friendly questions. In your bill, isn't it true that you require a balanced budget except times of war or natural disaster?
That's absolutely accurate. We
I
make
think
those provisions.
I think that's fabulous. And isn't it true that we, a part-time legislature, have a balanced budget, and it is only because it's in our Constitution, but also we're responsible for the money, the tax dollars for the people of the state of Georgia.
That's exactly it, and I'm proud of the job our Senate's done with your leadership and others.
Isn't it true? I support this bill, and thank you for bringing it to us.
Very glad to have your support, and I hope I'll have it from the majority of this body.
Do you continue to yield?
I yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 44th for a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
I yield.
Senator, I understand that this will undercut Social Security and Medicare, and that's what I'm most interested in. If Social Security has trillions of dollars in the Treasury, and the money is there for the retirees, and the money is there for the baby boomers, I tell you, I'm gonna need Social Security. And my constituents, I had people call me this weekend about housing assistance. They can't pay the mortgage, they can't pay the rent. You know, so I got to have a forum on housing assistance this week. Got to have a forum on health care to tell people they will be able to get the vaccine. So why would I vote for this bill and people need money? We got trillions of dollars in the Treasury for Social Security, and if we don't use the money, I mean, I just don't understand why I would vote against my constituents in this. Why would I vote against myself?
Well, let me explain that to you. You're basing your question on a false premise that all those projects are going to disappear if we were to pass this. You should feel the most comfortable anybody in this room because we have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate that will be setting those priorities of what they think the money should be spent on. And so those decisions will be made by people elected by our population to set our priorities. You raise a question about Social Security. That money is in a trust fund. It is not in the general budget. Now, in these calculations, the sleight of hand that the Congressional Budget Office, et cetera, have done, they treat those surpluses as offsetting the deficit spending. So it's really dramatically worse than it appears. But that money, unless Congress undermines it, is already set aside for those of us that have paid into the Social Security system.
Okay. Now,
If you're buying the arguments, the scare tactics against this, that it's going to take away whatever, government program that you like, that's not the way this works. The elected officials still decide what to fund and what not to fund, and if there's not enough money, to raise the taxes to pay for it. It's a trade-off. You got to decide: are you willing to pay enough taxes to provide the services that your constituents demand, or not? That's the process.
Does the senator further yield?
I'll be glad to yield to you, Senator.
But the senator from the 36 brought up the idea that the money has to be spent in that same year when it comes to Social Security.
We don't. Well, she said that, and she said several other things that were false because this is left up to be debated. The states will decide what they want to put in the balanced budget amendment, and if they want to put that being spent in this each year or not. Georgia, we got a reserve fund. Do you think the United States has a reserve fund? Boy, I wonder why not. It'd be nice if we did.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Do you
Senator.
continue to yield?
I yield.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 21st for a question.
Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for bringing this, and I supported the first resolution, and I'm going to support this. I think this one's more important. But my question is, on lines 26 through 36, you list these states that have they adopted, so we would be the trigger, because there's 33 states listed here. We would be the trigger if it passed through the General Assembly to call the convention?
If the United States Congress agreed that each of these have a application addressing this subject matter. There's debate over several of those states whether they are still valid, whether they've been rescinded. I'm not sure what the constitutional scholars would say. I believe that Mississippi has acknowledged there's some defect with theirs and they're going to readdress it this legislative session. I think we make 34.
Okay, and
But
it looks
that's subject to interpretation.
Further yield?
Yes, I
It
yield.
looks like at least 10 of these are Democrat states.
Absolutely.
So-
Yeah, this is not a partisan issue either. I mean, this is something, this began, I told y'all, 10 years ago. We passed this identical application 7 years ago. And it sunsetted, so we're renewing it here. That's all we're asking to do.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
You have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well and ask for your favorable support.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 16th to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the time here as we deal with this issue. I think the issue of the debt, when we look at a 40% increase in debt, is one thing, but here's what we have to realize. The government can tax you, they can tax me, or they can print money they don't have that makes your money and my money worthless. The missing element that we do not recognize and is not looked at is the issue of inflation. It is the carbon monoxide that you can't smell, you can't taste, you can't see. And what's happening to us as we borrow more money, we kept the interest rates artificially low because we don't want to pay the interest. But what we fail to recognize is that inflation can eat away at what you and I have, the money in our bank accounts, the money in our investments. And the issue is not just taxing, it is also the inflation rate that occurs. I would remind you that the states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states. And we need to realize that we have a voice in what the federal government does to us and does with our money. I'm reminded of this. By the time I get through up here, every 22 seconds, the debt increases $1 million. $1 million. That does not include the interest cost that's going in there, but simply has increased because we're borrowing money. You know, my dad, when I was a little boy, I remember him, we were in a restaurant one day, and there was an item and it said free. And my dad was a very wise man. I said, Dad, look, it's free. He says, no, it's not free. He says, there is nothing free. It costs somebody something. And whether it's a free piece of candy or whether it's a matchbook, somebody paid for that. There is no such thing as free. It costs somebody something. I was looking at the numbers. Their debt per citizen is $84,000. But interesting, the debt per taxpayer, because not everybody pays taxes, is $223,000. But guess what? The revenue per citizen is $10,400 is estimated. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this. Ronald Reagan had a story he told about the drunk sailor. He says, the federal government spends money like a drunken sailor. He says, I need to apologize to the drunken sailor. At least he has the decency to spend his own money. Some of you will get that. But I'm like this. Y'all wait on that. But I believe this. We are in an airplane in a negative nosedive, and we have two choices. You can either get rid of the weight, or you can increase the power. And the problem is the power is the revenue. The weight is the junk that we have. And when I say junk, there are many things that are passed through our federal companies. We spend money on this just junk. And we need to look at what the purpose is and what is the purpose of the federal government. And I believe that the states need to speak and we need to act, because if we don't, they will continue to print money and it will make your money and my money worthless. Even if they raise taxes, the other part is the inflationary issues that are going to hit us. And I believe that this amendment, this resolution needs to be passed, and we need to say, you need to get your act in order, your house in order, because every one of us can't spend what we don't have. And I thank you.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 54th to speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Friends and colleagues, anyone who knows me knows how I love history. And there was a word that they used at the nation's founding, and the word was posterity. And throughout our history as a nation and as a state, the greatest generation were those generations who committed everything that they did, not for themselves, but for their posterity, for future generations that would come after us. And I'll tell you this because in 2000, as many of you know, my entire life I've worked with kids. I've coached Little League sports of all kinds. I've worked as a juvenile probation officer. And everything that I've done throughout my life has literally been because I want the next generation to know what freedom is. The same freedom that I stood on a wall when I served in the 82nd Airborne Division and was prepared to give my life for. In 2009, when we first hit $10 trillion in debt as a nation, that was just 12 years ago. In 2009, when we hit $10 trillion in national debt, it worried me. I thought, my God, look, how did we get here? For the first time, it's a double digit now. And so I sat down with a calculator and I figured it up. Because I was thinking, do people even know the difference between a million, billions, and trillions? What's that look like if it's sitting here on the table? So I sat down with a calculator and I thought, if we're just going to pay $1 trillion just directly to the principal of our national debt, forget the other 9 or now forget the other 21, if we're just going to pay $1 trillion toward the principal of the national debt, and we paid $1 per second for every second of time to go directly to that principal, this is what the calculation results were. In 12 days, we could pay off $1 million. To pay off $1 billion with a B, it would take 32 years at $1 per second. And to pay $1 trillion toward our national debt, it would take 32,000 years at $1 per second. This isn't about us. It's not about the folks in this room. It's not a partisan issue. It's literally, what are we doing to our kids? What are we leaving for our kids? And we have reverence for the word posterity, just as those who came before us. Thank you, Mr. President. If there are no questions, I'll yield the will.
You have no questions. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair sees none. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the adoption of the resolution, the yeas are 34, the nays are 20. The resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021.
Mr. Secretary, please make the announcements.
The Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment in room 450. The Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Committee is canceled. Finance Committee will meet at 1 p.m. in room 450. Judiciary Committee will meet at 2:15 in room 307 CLOB. SLOGO Committee will meet at 2:30 in room 310 CLOB. Education and Youth Committee will meet at 3:30 in room 307 CLOB. Ethics Committee will meet at 4:45 in room 307 CLOB. Tomorrow, Tuesday, February 23rd, the Government Oversight Committee will meet at 8 a.m. in room 450. And Veterans, Military, and Homeland Security Committee will meet at 8 a.m. in room 307 CLOB. This completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair wants to announce that the senator from the 19th is going to be handing out business cards for where he got his haircut this weekend. He did amazing job. Very, very good. Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Real quick, as you know, rules meeting today, but let me explain something. At the beginning of a new session, we're like cooking a pot roast. It's slow cooking. And then all of a sudden, everything happens at once and we're frying chicken. Well, let me tell you, we're frying chicken now. We're about to get busy. The committee's got a lot of work to do. It's going to get full and busy and busier. So just be prepared. Be ready for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st for an announcement. I don't know if he knew he had an announcement. Got an announcement? All right. Chair recognizes, well, nobody. Nobody else has got an announcement left. Do you have an announcement? Senator from the 31st? Think you need to talk to your suite mates. They think you, or your seat mates, they think you have an announcement. All right, the Majority Leader has moved that we need to get out of here. The Majority Leader has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021 at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Any ayes? Clearly have it. The Senate will stand adjourned.